So every once in a while I like to pick up some PC parts and see exactly what they can do, usually tipping myself off at the budget end of the scale with the cheapest I can actually find. So this time I've done it again and picked up a graphics card for as low as £1. This right here is the HD 4890, the same graphics card I tested a whole year ago, which isn't exactly a video that I recommend you guys go and check out. I picked up this card from CEX for a low £1, which is around $1.40. Based on the RV790XT variant of the Terascale architecture, it was the first commercial graphics card to release with stock clocks above 1 GHz. It does come with 1GB of GDDR5 VRAM clocked in at 975 MHz and comes complete with 800 shading units, a surprisingly capable amount, all of which is powered by the 190 watt TDP, which does sound quite bad and power hungry, but you have to keep in mind that this card does have a lot of power saving features, but you do have to keep in mind that this was a very nicely performing card back in the day, and those power saving features really did put it ahead of the competition in some aspects, mainly idle related power draw. But where's the main downfall of this card so far? Well, firstly the fan doesn't work and is very stiff to move, but we can deal with that. So where is the real downfall? Well, the card's driver support ended all the way back in 2013, meaning that modern titles struggle to even operate on the card. That's if they will even start, considering that we top out at DirectX 10.1 support. And if you want to see performance at stock on a graphics card like this, feel free to go back and watch the third video I ever released on the channel, as it was on this graphics card. Now, as we get this card cleaned up, let's talk a little bit about my issues with this card in 2018. Now, a few weeks ago I tested the 8800 GT and it performed well, very well in fact, despite being the cheapest variant of it. But the HD 4890 should beat it in all titles. I mean, it's a more powerful graphics card and it has more VRAM. And that holds true for all pre-2013 titles when the driver support was stopped, meaning that any games that utilise features heavily and need driver-side optimizations, for example GTA 5, they will run fine on DirectX 10 on the Nvidia card, as it does have driver support there. But on this older Terascale card, which driver support tops out at 2013 and does not include the 15.4 driver fix required for GTA to run nicely, well, it didn't run great. There's a lot of frame time related issues and a lot of frame drops here or there, which is the case with a lot of the large games that came out after 2013. So why don't we get this card all cleaned up, put back together, and I'll tell you guys how I'm going to fix this issue. So what was the main reason for prompting this review? Well, realistically I'm not going to pass up on a graphics card for £1, and I'd actually just had a reply on an old Reddit thread I made a whole year ago, asking if anyone had tried the hybrid drivers that allowed old Terascale laptops to function with the new Crimson drivers, as apparently they bundled in desktop support. And it wasn't until recently that someone linked me to the website claiming they had actually got it working, despite having a few issues. So, of course, no one has widely tested these things, at least not from what I can find, so I downloaded the latest drivers they had available on their forums, and began the installation of the drivers, which in the end did actually install. But here's where things get a little bit complicated. Now, for my case, I had to go through and select the INF files manually, and fortunately there were tons of them to go through. Yay! And I regularly got error code 43, which is a frequent issue that happens when trying to get this thing running on a graphics card, as apparently the graphics cards aren't too keen on running with these drivers, at least not with any modern operating system. So of course I broke out my other HD 4890 to make sure it wasn't the card, and the exact same thing happened, meaning that it was the driver's fault and that our HD 4890 does actually work. So in the end, after countless hours, the time hit 2 AM. And we'd done it. After going through INF file one by one, countless uses of DDU, the drivers did appear to be working, and functioning somewhat well. So why don't we see what these modded drivers can do, and see if they can make gaming on £1 any good. Up first we have the likes of GTA 5, as this was a noticeably poor game beforehand, and makes sense to see if there's actually been any improvements made. And to no one's surprise, with some real working drivers, the card was powering through the game. It was strange seeing just how limited a card can be by lack of driver support for such a large game. We saw an average of 54 FPS, 1% lows down to 39 FPS, as well as 0.1% lows down to 26 FPS, just below that 30 FPS region. This was all in the 720p resolution with normal settings selected, which, as we saw beforehand, made virtually no difference to the FPS or playability of the game when we were using it with the old drivers. Regardless of what settings used, it was still a stuttering mess, which gave me the confidence using these drivers to move the game up to 1080p, with the same settings as used before in 720p. It's not as fluent as it was beforehand, but it's definitely a playable experience, and a large step up from the stuttering mess that was the game on the final 13.4 drivers for the card, but personally I'd stick to 720p for this one. Fortnite is one of the most popular games around right now, so I thought I'd give it a test seeing as it still supports DirectX 10, as previously the graphics card would refuse to even start the game, which is rather strange for anti-cheat to detect the normal drivers as being unsafe to use. But with the modded drivers, which required me to start the game as administrator, otherwise it would crash and give me error code 43 again, the game did actually start and the performance was decent. There were some major frame drops around the beginning which caused our 0.1% lows as you can see, but for the most part during gunfights inside buildings and once you're on the ground it did hover around the 60 FPS region while using the 900p resolution and virtually the lowest settings overall, with a few of them heightened slightly to make the game look slightly nicer. Not that lowering them would actually help FPS wise, as even then the drivers we're using are only so up to date, but they do tend to work for games like this. CSGO, while running in 720p, is working much better than it previously worked before, with the graphical settings set to low and the shadows set to high. The experience is definitely a competitive one, especially for the low price, and frame times felt much smoother throughout my time playing the game compared to the older drivers. Although last time I played it wasn't necessarily bad, the older drivers are actually optimised for games like this. The new drivers just helped raise the average a little bit and keep the frame times just slightly tighter. In 1080p it was a similar story to that of 720p. Very much playable, but I found the frame drops could be slightly more distracting in certain instances. Although infrequent, it's not ideal for competitive gaming, as really you need a few more FPS to give you the headroom you need to properly function in a game like this, and with 0.1% lows down to 31 FPS region, usually when a lot of extensive stuff was coming on, you get the idea. It's playable, but I'd stick to 720p. Rocket League, which was bought for me by Alex over on the Discord, so thank you for that, runs very nicely on this card, and I'll be honest, this is the first time I've ever played the game, so I opted for a nice mixture of medium and high settings to ensure the game looked pretty good when it was running, and it did look good, especially with an average FPS of 70 FPS, 1% lows down to 41 FPS, and 0.1% lows down to 32 FPS at the very worst of times. It was very rare to see any form of frame drop in a game like this, although it is a very closed-in experience. But overall, for £1, what can I say, the game ran very smoothly. I can't necessarily say it's the modded drivers coming into effect here, but either way, playable for £1 is good in my books. Crysis was a game that ran okay on the other drivers. Given the age of the game, it's not surprising, but once again these drivers seem to work ever so slightly better, and while we know that the HD 4890 can power through a game like Crysis, even with medium and high settings in 1080p, including more high options than that of medium, it was a very smooth experience if you exclude the frame drops, which was represented by our 1% and 0.1% lows, but these were only brief and happened when a lot of effects were taking place, which is self-explanatory when you see how nice the game is looking with these settings. Realistically, the drivers were already in place, performed very nicely with a game like this, but it's just a testament for the video before you guys comment down below, asking if £1 can run Crysis. And yes, it can. Tomb Raider is another modern game that ran very nicely. I have a fair amount of experience messing around with this game, but mainly in Linux. So with some medium settings and a couple of options set slightly higher, we saw an average of 54 FPS throughout the gameplay and during our in-game benchmark. So as you can imagine, with frame times as tight as they're appearing down on the left, the game looked very smooth, looked great, and was altogether a brilliant experience on the card. Utilization remained near 100% throughout the entire time playing, which is very nice to see, showing that the final release day drivers of the card might not be up to scratch, but the drivers available here really do help utilization on the card. Finally, to round us off, we have Elite Dangerous, which operated with an average of 54 FPS, with the best frame times we actually ever saw on the card. Purely because of how nicely the game is optimized. We're running with the Horizons expansions while entering a combat zone and engaging in a fight. It also captured the frame rates while we were travelling into the combat zone and around the galaxy, so you sort of see where we're coming from in terms of frame time stability, which was really nice. We saw hardly any fluctuations, which is really a testament to the power of the card and the brilliant work the developers have gone into making sure that Elite Dangerous works well, even on an old DirectX 10 based GPU. Upon starting the game though, it did inform me that the game wasn't going to work. But once you click OK, the game starts and then it runs fine, which is very strange. To round us off with games, we have Dolphin Emulator using DirectX 9 with the 900p resolution. We saw barely any frames dropped throughout, but do keep in mind that the OpenGL renderer does destroy performance, which is what you'd have to use if you were using the main fork of Dolphin. And the DirectX 9 renderer does have issues due to it being depreciated, so you will have some issues in newer games, missing effects or inaccuracies, and sometimes very minor slowdown. Finally, I tested the card in 3D Mark to see if it made any noticeable difference in terms of repeatable benchmarks. So originally on a card like this we saw a score of 16,659, which is not bad at all, and after rerunning the test we saw an increase to 18,063, which is an increase very surprising considering we're just running different drivers here. Realistically, I'd need more time to investigate this further, but generally, as we can see, the card is seeing high utilization all round, which is very strange and doesn't exactly speak well for the final drivers released by ATI. So in conclusion, once again, the £1 HD 4890. Well, was it a bad buy? Well, it was £1, so it's virtually impossible to be a bad buy, but even then, considering the broken fan, which was an easy fix, albeit an unorthodox method of just spraying it down with water, the performance is definitely improved with the use of modded drivers, which I'll link down below, but ultimately they aren't very stable, and I'm surprised they even worked at all. Really, it'd be best to take a look at all the drivers available and compare them all individually, so I could see just how much of an improvement that these drivers made compared to each driver release. But overall, this is what the video was about, grabbing the cheapest GPU I saw available, knowing full well it'd probably have some issues given the location of the store it came from, as I've had issues related to that before, and at the end of the day, just seeing if these modded drivers could squeeze out a little bit more performance from what is quite an old card nowadays, nearing 9 years old. So, this is previously a card I wouldn't recommend due to the poor driver support. The HD 4000 series is brilliant, but it's crippled by its modern day support for DirectX 10 titles, and the performance in those newer DX10 games, which are a few years old but should still run on a card like this. But with these drivers, if you enjoy some tweaking and want to save some cash to play those DX10 titles, well, the HD 4000 series may be viable again. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing if modded drivers can help such a cheap graphics card. Good night. Thank you very much for watching this video, and don't forget you can always like and subscribe for more videos like this, as I always end up saying. So you can go and support us over on Patreon. I've just uploaded a 15-minute haul video, or it's 20 minutes, where I've essentially bought some stuff from the boot fair and I go through it individually for you guys to see what I've bought.